So, welcome everyone. This is the second webinar on building drought resilience through worm farming. I'll just go to this next slide. This is a slide of building a farm scale worm farm. This was on our farm, a workshop I ran. It's not the clearest photo, but I'm sure you can make it out. This is a group of farmers and land carers from the Goulburn district who came to participate in building a large-scale worm farm. These people were previously into composting, and this was an extension of their composting. So last fortnight, in session one, I talked about the basics of the importance of using worm juice, and this one's about the practicalities of how to build it and so forth. So this is a 10-metre long worm farm, 2.5 metres wide, and it's built on a slope of about 5% gradient. It needs to have a gradient so that the liquid can drain out of it. If you have completely flat land, you can artificially build a slope that's, with soil that will with sufficient slope to drain water out of it. So the land, you can see there's a plastic sheet there. That's concrete underlay, and it's a double layer of it. The concrete underlay comes in about 5 metre wide rolls sheet, and I doubled it, and the land underneath it is formed into a slight U shape. So across the 2.5 metres, the centre of it's probably 30 centimetres below the sides. So that causes the liquid to drain to the centre. And the orange coloured material down the centre there is sawdust. I put a material down the centre of it to allow easy drainage for the liquid. And over time that decays, but once the liquid has been running, then it will keep running through it. What's being applied there out of the wheelbarrow is worms and worm castings from another of my worm farms. At that stage, I had 3. I had a bathtub, another one with a large frame that was 3 metres long by the width of a sheet of corrugated iron, with 30 centimetre sides around it, was up on a stand. That was my second version. And so that supplied enough material to load this worm farm. This is a much larger one, 25 square metres. So underneath the that plastic, right on the edges, I've put some logs, probably 150 millimetre diameter logs, just to raise the edges. You can see in the centre on the right-hand side a little bit of a raise in the black plastic sheeting, but that just helps keep the liquid in. And we're transferring worms and worm castings. That it's important when you start that the worms have some bedding material. The worms used are typically red worms, tiger worms, and blue worms. These are generally, they're all soil worms, but they're referred to as manure worms. These are the worms that eat animal manures, etc., rather than worms that live permanently in the soil, or worms that make organic detritus. These particular worms are what are used in worm farms. And over probably nearly 20 years that I've had my worm farms running, or 25 since I started with the first batch of worms, I don't think there's any blue worms left. The reds and the tigers have thrived and dominated. And so I guess those are the most resilient when fed predominantly just manure. So I'll just go to the next slide. And there's a trailer load of worm castings and worms. And you can probably see, and I'll just zoom in there. You can see here the worms that are in here, and the orange colours are worms. There's thousands of worms in this material. And initially, I had enough material to start the farm 5 metres long. And in this photo, you can see the slope. So it takes around, just go to the next slide. Whoops, I think I'll go to that didn't work. So why doesn't it want to go? All it wants to do is go sideways. I'll escape that. Okay, try that. There. So in this next slide, you can see, so the first half of the worm farm is there, has been set up now with worm castings on it, and I've got some slashed grass on the top of it. Worms are very sensitive to light. They like to be in the shade. It's important to keep a worm farm covered all the time, otherwise they don't work on the surface. So you get a lot better production if you keep it covered. I now use a tarp over it, but you'll see in a later slide that for a while I was using 1 tonne fertiliser bags to cover it, but I have an old large tarp now that I cover it. So in this next slide, you'll see here, this is probably 1 year on. And at the bottom end, you can see I've used guttering from house guttering, just attached to some steel posts, and that also obviously runs downhill and drains into 200 litre drums. Now, I have three 1,000 litre IBCs at the end there because the drums couldn't keep up. The feedstock I put on this is goat manure and grass. Our goats are all have houses. We have enough housing for 300 goats, and they don't sleep there every night. But as soon as it's going to rain or during winter, they'll sleep inside, and it very quickly gets soiled. And at least twice a year, I've got to clean it out. And we put slashed grass bedding in the houses, and they defecate and urinate on it, and when it's sufficiently soiled, I'll clean it out and give it to the worms. And the worms will eat anything that's lived and died, as I said last time, as long as the pH is between 4.6 and 10.5. And but worms don't like their diet being changed. Hello? Worms don't like their diet being changed rapidly. So worms, given a constant diet, they adapt to it, and then they'll thrive on it. In domestic situations, people will have a worm farm just for dog manure, and the worms thrive on it, providing that's what they get all the time. Yeah. So these get goat manure, and that grass that's on it's dark, partly because there's a lot of urine in there, so a lot of nitrogen, but also because it's kept wet. And the white covers 1 tonne bulker bags that had pelletized chicken manure that I used to use. As a trial, I used it for about 4 or 5 years before I decided the worm juice was its equal at a fraction of the price. So you can see down here that's just goat manure. The worm farm needs to be kept moist, and I typically will water it every second day. It's really important when building a worm farm that you site it where you have water. You want to have reticulated water near the worm farm, and obviously as close as possible to the feed source. So then if you've got a shearing shed, that's your food stock, then it's much easier to manage if you build it beside or near the shearing shed. It's not very far to carry to feed to the worms, and you're easy to get water there. Now, you could set sprinklers up over them, the worm farm. I don't. I just have a hose with a nozzle on the end of it, and I just spend about 20 minutes each second morning, giving them a drink. And the centre of this worm farm in this picture is about 1/2 metre deep of castings. It'll go up to about 1 metre deep before I feel I need to take castings out. So it will hold a lot of castings. And if you want to enrich, when the liquid comes out of it, the worm juice comes out, it should look like black tea, reasonably light black tea. And if you want to enrich it, you can circulate the drained liquid back and put it back over the worm farm, and it'll become much darker and stronger. I've never done that. I don't really think it's necessary. It does enrich it, and you don't perhaps have to use as much, but I make plenty of it. So I don't have to go down that path. So that's basically what a worm farm looks like, built on the ground on a bit of a slope. They're very simple to build. A bit of earthworks there, which I did with the tractor, and underneath the plastic, I put a layer of about a 2-inch layer of sand in the valley there, directly behind the tractor. We have a river, and there's a lot of sand in it, so I just brought sand up from there, and I put a layer of sand on it. That's so that there's no, in case there's any sharp rocks in the soil that might puncture the plastic. The concrete underlay plastic is very durable. However, you have to be careful when you're removing worm castings to make sure you don't go close to the plastic, because it does become brittle and will easily puncture. And there's not a lot of advantage in having a leak in it. This plastic here now is probably at least 15 years old. It's starting to become brittle, and I've removed the bottom half of the castings, just leaving about a 6-inch layer, and I'm contemplating now I'll probably pull up the plastic, and I might even put concrete under it to be more durable. But you have to be very sure the concrete won't crack. So my thought is I'll just put about a 4-inch layer of concrete with some couple of layers of chicken netting in it to aid it from cracking, just cement and river sand to be more durable. I could just replace the plastic and it would last, assuming it's leaking, and I suspect it might be starting to leak, because I don't think I'm getting as much juice as I was out of it compared to the amount of, I always measure the amount of water I apply. I've checked the flow rate coming out of the hose, and then I time it so I know how much I'm putting on. And once the castings build up to a large quantity, perhaps double what's here, when I'm applying worm juice, I have 3 1,000 litre IBCs now that it drains into. If I run out of juice, I can just put a heavy dose of water on it and take 1,000 litres, put 1,000 litres through the worm farm, and it'll come through really good quality juice. Obviously, if you did it numerous times, it would then weaken, but I can do it once or twice to get 1,000 or 2,000 litres extra out of it, and I can do that in one day. And that then allows me to do a lot more application if I'm running short. I have done that perhaps 3 times in the last 10 years. What do we got here? These are the nozzles I use. You can see these are plastic fan spray nozzles. There's a link in one of the slides to come to a website where they can be purchased from. There's two reasons why I use these nozzles, well, three reasons actually. One is that it's a very large aperture, so that they don't block very easily. In fact, I've never had one block. They are very low cost. That nozzle and that hose fitting together cost me $15. If you buy a brass fan spray nozzle, you can easily pay $300. At the time that I bought this, the date of it is on that invoice behind there, and you'll see it later, probably 8 or so years ago. At that time, a brass one was $320, and I got that for $15. And the third advantage of these is they're plastic, and they don't, which means they don't wear, whereas brass over time will wear. So this is where I got the nozzles from, Midland Irrigation in Victoria. There's a company in Bega now called Baz's Pumps that are now stocking them. Midland Irrigation, they will mail order them out to you. They come in a range of sizes. So the one I use, well, I'll just go through here. This is a 50-litre spray pack on the back of my quad bike, and you can see down the bottom here, there's the nozzle. It's got a sure flow pump on it, and they're a fairly low volume, low pressure pump, and that nozzle is a number 6, and which matches that sure flow pump, and that has about a 6 metre, 5 to 6 metre spray width. So when I want to perhaps go and check the goats or the cows, and I'll load up with a load of 50 litres of worm juice, and I'll go and spray it on a small amount of paddock, and it doesn't cover a great deal of area, but that will do about 1/4 of a hectare. I put on, an 1/8 of a hectare. I typically spray 400 litres a hectare of liquid, in which I have 10 litres of worm juice. So this will do about 1/8 of a hectare. So 8 trips and I've got a hectare done. And I was travelling to see the livestock anyway, so there's no extra cost. So this is a really, really handy little spray pack to have. And this is a 200 litre unit I set up for my daughter on her farm, and the nozzles, there's a sure flow pump just there, and the nozzle is on the back. This is a same sure flow pump, so same size nozzle, a number 6. And at 200 litres, that'll do half a hectare. And she can just tow it around with the quad bike. She doesn't own a tractor, and has a small farm, 65 acres, I think. She can comfortably do it with the quad bike and a 200 litre sprayer. Whereas for myself, I use this unit. This is a 400 litre sprayer. I'll just zoom in a bit. And this is a number 17 nozzle. So this is a 400 litre Sylvan sprayer with a diaphragm pump. And this has a spray width of 15 metres, which means you cover quite a big area. And the advantage of having a single nozzle is you can drive through gateways, near trees, etc., and compared to a boom, and not have to stop and make any adjustments. And when I first started spraying, on the back of that spray pack are 2 fold-out booms for chemical spraying, which I don't do, but they're there. When I first started doing this, I had nozzles on the end of those booms, and I would irregularly run into a wombat hole with the back wheel, and the boom would hit the ground and snap the nozzle off. Really, really annoying. As soon as I shifted to the single fan spray, never had an issue since. So I only have a 400 litre sprayer on the back of the tractor because, as you can see behind, our country is pretty steep, and the central ridge there is probably certainly not the steepest of our country, but as you can see, it's relatively steep, so it's much safer just to have a small tank, and I keep it down fairly low to keep the centre of gravity low for safety. So I have a friend who has a flat land, and he has a 1,000 litre IBC on the back of his Land Cruiser and a 5 horsepower firefighter pump, and he uses a number 21 nozzle, and the firefighter pump only has to run slightly above idle to get a 15 metre spray width. Very economical, easy to get around. So the size of the unit is controlled by the steepness or slope, the safety of using it, and your capacity to supply whatever the unit is. So I'll just get back to that. Now, why doesn't every time I expand, I have a problem? Now, there, and that shouldn't be the end. Where are we? Oh, it is. Okay, so that's my last slide on that. Now, when applying worm juice, I would recommend that it's applied twice a year. The application rate should be 10 litres a hectare is what I've found to be very effective. And I think I said last time that I've put on 20. No visible difference. I tried 20 because I had plenty of juice. I've tried higher applications, but I've since spoken to a scientist who is very familiar with the effects of worm juice, and the scientist said that more is actually detrimental. If you go to large quantities, it's detrimental. You're better off to use a very light application, 5 to 10 litres a hectare. And what it does is it sends a biosignal to all of the organisms, not only plants but microbes in the soil, and it stimulates their function. So 10 litres a hectare. One thing I would recommend, firstly, that it's done twice a year, and the best times to apply is in early autumn, when plants are actively growing, and not in really bright, hot, sunny days. I don't apply it if it's over 25 degrees C. I don't mind full sun if it's a cooler day, but I don't apply over 25 degrees C. And the reason for that is once the temperature hits 26, plants start closing their stomata to conserve water, and therefore they can't take in very much. They're reducing their intake, so you don't get as good an effect. So you're better to put it on in cool weather. So I typically like to do it early in the morning or late in the afternoon. As I think I said last time, I used to spray it at night, but that's not necessary. During the day is probably better when the plants are actively photosynthesizing. So the important thing is that the plants are actively growing. So any time's a good time. But if your land's drought affected and plants have shut down, they're not going to take in. It's certainly going to be applied to the land, and microbes will sense the effect of it. but it's far better taken in through the leaf of the plant. And some will always go to the soil. The second application I do in early spring, early to mid-spring. Here we typically have dry winters and a late start to, a late fall of rain in spring. So it's often September or into October. So when we come into spring, if we have soil moisture and plants start growing, that's when I apply it. And a good signal of when to apply it is when soil temperatures hit about 15 to 16 degrees, because that's when biology comes to life, comes out of its winter slumber. The way to without having a soil thermometer, if you look at your weather forecast, most forecasters now give a 10-day forecast, like WeatherZone will give a 10-day prediction. If you add the maximum temperature for 10 days and the minimum for 10 days and take the mean of that at the end of that 10-day period, that will be the soil temperature in the top 10 centimetres of soil. So your average daily temperature over 10 days. When that's 16 degrees, that's when microbes start coming out of slumber, and that's when spring growth starts. So keeping an eye on the soil temperature is a good idea. I don't suggest it can't be put on in winter. I just think that if we're going to go to the effort of putting it on, we should do it at as close as possible to the optimum times. And again, although the microbes might be coming out of slumber in spring, they need moisture, and the plants need moisture to grow. So if it's dry, wait until it's rained and the plants are physically growing, and that's the time to apply it. As I said, two applications a year. The first application, I'd strongly recommend you add boron to it. Worm juice is low in boron, just like compost is low in boron. Our soils are low in boron. I see soil tests from all over the world, and it's uncommon, perhaps rare, to see a soil that has a good level of boron where a farmer hasn't been applying boron. Boron is always a nutrient that is deficient. And it's not necessary to go to the expense of doing a soil test to see what your boron levels are. If you use a product called dissolvable, which is what I use, and which is a crystalline form of boron fertilizer, and as its name suggests, it's designed to be dissolved and applied as a foliar. The application rate is 1 kilogram per hectare of dissolvable. Dissolvable is 21% boron, so the amount you're applying is 210 grams a hectare. So the important thing when applying micronutrients is to understand that the difference between deficiency and toxicity can be very small. And boron applied as dissolvable, toxicity would only occur with a high application rate of perhaps 10 kilos a hectare in one application. And typically 5 kilos would be the maximum to apply. Generally speaking, you should not apply any more than 1 kilogram a hectare of boron in a single application. So that would be 5 kilos of dissolvable. And then it only becomes toxic if you have a calcium deficiency. So that starts to get a bit technical. So to be on the safe side, if you put on 1 kilogram of dissolvable, which is only 210 grams of boron, it'll be completely safe. And as a foliar, that's a good amount to give a plant. Boron, the importance of boron can't be overstated. All biochemical reactions start with boron. Boron is the key to all plant functions, including microbial functions. Plants and microbes have very similar diets. So in any fertilizer application, the biggest return on investment we'll ever get will come from boron. one kilogram a hectare of dissolvable bore would cost about $4 to $5 a hectare. Very small amount, but it can have a major impact. And I don't think I mentioned this last time, but I'll just say this so that you get a picture of how important it is. In a recent grazing trial in our region, on a dairy farm in a silage paddock, the soil was tested, fertiliser was applied, superphosphate and potassium, muriate of potash was applied to correct phosphorus and potassium deficiencies, and the rest they thought was okay, but they noted the boron was low. So they put that fertiliser on the whole paddock. On half the paddock, they applied 1 kilogram a hectare of dissolvable. When it came to cutting the silage, the side they put the dissolvable on yielded 300% more silage. And at that time, the cost was $4 a hectare for the boron. So that's how important boron is. No nitrogen was used in that trial. So boron is critical. So when applying worm juice, really important to add boron to it, but only once a year. The second application, don't put any in. Once a year, and you could probably do it for about 4 years and then skip a year without doing a soil test. I mean, you could soil test, and boron should be at least 2 parts per million in your soil, and the cation exchange capacity of your soil determines how much it should, what level it should be. But if you're not into soil testing, and a soil test will generally cost you about $150, and if you're not fertilising, there's no point in doing a soil test. You could get your soil tested for boron, and that test would only cost you about $20. You could get it tested for carbon too, and that's about $35 for an organic carbon test. Both could be worthwhile, but when I started using worm juice, I didn't do any soil testing, not for about 8 years. I just kept applying worm juice, and the farm became very resilient, especially to drought. Pastures performed well, we had good diversity, and the cost, well, there's cost in the application, and there's some labour in running the worm farm, but the off-farm expenses are very small. Once you have a tractor and the equipment, there's no day-to-day expenses other than some diesel. I think other than boron, I've tried putting in nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, just to see if I could boost growth. And if I'm growing a crop, say I'm growing an oats crop or the like, I would put some of those fertilisers in it. But for perennial pasture, boron is the only thing. When I started soil testing, I noted I had very low copper, so which is also common. So for a couple of years, I put a bit of copper in it, and copper sulfate is 25% copper, and I use the same amount, 1 kilo a hectare of copper sulfate. And copper is a fungicide, and when I told a particular scientist I was having discussions with on the subject, and I'd put a heavy application on one paddock for a trial of 3.5 kilos of copper sulfate in with the worm juice, and this scientist was somewhat horrified, saying I'd kill all the fungi in the soil. And as I said, the difference between deficiency and toxicity is very small. So the next day, I'd put this on about 3 weeks before we had this conversation. The next day I went out and pulled soil samples, and I did a microbial extraction and put them under the microscope because I use a microscope, and where I put the high copper concentration, it had the highest soil fungi. I compared it to where I didn't, same soil, right beside it where I didn't put the copper, and there was at least 400% more fungi, active fungi, and where I didn't put it, there was a single species of fungi. Where I put it, there were 3 species of fungi, easily identified. So when I discussed this with a scientist, I said, clearly the fungi need copper as well, which they do, and it was a limiting factor because it was so low. So as I said at the outset or earlier, the difference between deficiency and toxicity can be very small, but if you're going to increase the amount of a micronutrient, you really do need to have a soil test and know the subject, at least get some advice from an agronomist. Outside of that, that's about it for the application and the running of worm farms. I did 4 workshops over in New Zealand in 2014 on building farm scale worm farms, and over there, one farmer who I'd been liaising with for a year before, and he'd already built a big worm farm, and he had very and 1,000 acres that he could get over the tractor, and another 3,000 that was way too steep. And he ran sheep, and he put it on with a helicopter. I was shocked, but he said no, it was cheap. The helicopter was there for about 6 hours, and he had a lot of worm juice stored up and needed 3,000 acres. He said it wasn't expensive at all, and he said his fibre content, fibre quality improved. So he said it was highly beneficial. So, horses for courses, I suppose. One thing that you probably know already is if you're growing fibre, a really important nutrient is sulphur. There's a lot of sulphur in fibre, and it stimulates fibre growth, fibre strength. So it's probably worth soil testing to see what your sulphur levels are, because you can easily apply a bit of foliar sulphur. I wouldn't mix it with worm juice, I'd put it on separately, but you can buy a product called Thiovit Jet. It's made by a company called Syngenta, organically certified, and it's dissolvable. Most, like elemental sulphur, you can't dissolve, but Thiovit Jet dissolves, registered as a fungicide and miticide, but it's a very good way to put a foliar sulphur on your paddock, give your plants sulphur if you have sulphur deficiency, and sulphur deficiency is just as common as boron deficiency. So it's a great way to improve fibre production and very low cost. It's not expensive. So not a lot of people are aware that sulphur is so deficient in our soils, and that it's so important. Another advantage of having a good sulphur is that if your livestock get lice or ticks, that's a clear sign of a sulphur deficiency. As soon as you lift sulphur in the pasture or give the animal a sulphur supplement, the lice and ticks will go. You don't need an insecticide. It's a clear sign of a sulphur deficiency. So sulphur is really important. I use Thiovit Jet as a foliar, but I just don't mix it with worm juice. If I'm going to use it, then I'll mix it perhaps with other fertilisers. I typically don't put any fertiliser in with worm juice, except for boron. Boron is a fertiliser, but it's a very low dose application. And that's probably it. I think if anyone has any questions they think of later, feel free to email me, bruce@soilsmith.ag. There's a link on the website to my and the advertising for this on the flyer for it. So feel free to email me. And if you're someone who has taken a soil test, feel free to send me your soil test and I'll have a look at it and graph it for you and tell you what's needed without writing a full report. But you'll be able to. I'll show you the state of your soil. I can do it very easily. I'm happy to do that without fee. And a comprehensive report, I charge $85 plus GST. But to just graph it for you and show you what it looks like and give you a estimate of what it needs, I'm happy to do that without fee. So I'd say that's it. And are you there, Grant?
Yes, Bruce, my apologies. I had some technical issues in the early stages of the presentation. So a belated welcome to you and everyone. I will have to rely on the recording to catch up on everything.
Okay.
Are there any questions from those attending right now?